Our frog bridge is another staple exercise in our isometric series, part of our groundwork. Our key concepts with our frog bridge are the positioning of our ankles and knees so that we're getting more glute engagement along with our hamstring. Frog iso bridge, here are the key points and check marks. As usual, we're going to have that stable line, straight hip extension, knee, hip, shoulder, all in line. We want to be sure that there's a deeper bend in the knees, and the key aspect of it is that our heels are digging into the ground, driving hard. Our butt is driving and squeezing our hips. Core is tight, rib cage breathing, and our ribs are pulled down. In addition to that, we are pulling the knees apart and flexing our toes as all these things happen. So the simple cues for this as we move through the system will be as follows. So starting position for our frog iso bridge, very similar, back is flat. The key concept and change here is that we're going to have our feet start together, so toes, transverse arch, and heels are all together. We're going to use a band to accommodate this resistance. To add accommodating resistance, our knees are externally rotated, are pointing outward so that the hip is externally rotated. As always, we want to start by setting that spine and that core and bracing. So what we're going to see is the athlete cue. We inhale through the nose, exhale through the mouth, and then as we exhale, driving that spine into the ground. That's always our first cue. Once we've driven the spine into the ground, as always, the athlete still maintains breathing. So the athlete is still breathing, but there's a conscious effort to be driving that spine into the ground, keeping the core and ribs tight. Remember, if we have trouble doing this, ask your athlete to laugh or make them laugh while their hand is on their stomach so they can feel how their core contracts and their ribs and their rib cage moves when they're actually tightening their core. Once we see successful bracing, our next cue is always going to be 10 toes. We want to flex them. Remember, flexion of the toes means that we're pulling the toes away from the transverse arch. So they're being pulled. It's not necessarily towards our face now because of the angle of our foot, but we're still driving all 10 toes and flexing them. Once the toes are flexed, our spine is down. We're going to go spine down, squeezing our stomach, flexing our toes. Then we dig the heels into the ground. That pressure is going to cause us to see the heels, the front of the foot elevate. We want to be sure that they're still flexing those toes while digging those heels into the ground towards their butt so that the hamstring starts to fire. Whether the athlete uses a band is up to the strength level of that athlete during the groundwork. Your brain creates all the contraction in your muscle and tension. So if you don't use a band, that is okay. As long as we're giving these cues, we have to understand. If we say flex our toes, they're flexing their toes as hard as they can. Squeeze your stomach, drive it into the ground. You're doing that as hard as you can. There is nothing here that is 99% effort. It is all 100%. If you cramp, you cramp. Try to work past it. Cramping will start to dissipate and go away once we understand that if we engage our entire body, yes, the cramp will still feel kind of uncomfortable, but our whole body will deal with that tension. Our last cue to get to our full iso is going to be squeezing our stomach, we're digging our heels, flexing our toes, pulling the band apart, or just driving our knees apart. And then we're going to, once again, squeeze our hips. So we're squeezing our hips together like you're crushing a quarter with your butt cheek. And we're going to use our hamstrings once again. So we're going to use our hamstrings to dig and pull our hips into extension. So not only are we understanding and learning that the glutes fire and create hip extension, but that the hamstring signals that method, and we're strengthening the contraction and co-contraction along with the communication and signaling of the hamstrings to help hip extension happen. Once we're in our iso position here in full iso, remember, we have that line happening. Knees are pulled apart as you come up. There'll be a tendency if we're wearing a band to have the knees to come together. They've got to fight to keep the knees open as they dig their heels, squeeze their butt, and keep their stomach tight. We hold this position once again for the specified set time. This is our ultimate goal right here. Knees pulling the band apart, stomach tight, synced, stacked line, digging those heels as hard as we can.